You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
In a rare conciliatory note to India on 19 March, Pakistan's powerful army chief Gen Bajwa called for the arch rivals to bury the past and move towards cooperation. The note comes after a surprise joint statement issued by the two neighbours on 25th February, where each side recommitted to a ceasefire along the line of control and other disputed sections of the border. In response to General Bajwa's speech, Prime Minister Narendra Modi wrote to Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan on 22nd March, extending greetings on Pakistan Day, and further stated that India desires cordial relations with its neighbour in an environment devoid of terror and hostility. Now, tensions between the two countries plunged to their lowest after August 2019, when the Indian government removed the special status of Jammu and Kashmir and locked down the former state. Since then, according to government data, there have been close to 7,000 incidents of crossfire across the LOC, accompanied by rising invective by the two countries' leaders online. However, there are signs of the India-Pakistan relationship thawing, with the two governments even agreeing to cooperate on healthcare under the aegis of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, or SARC. The centre recently also allowed Prime Minister Imran Khan's special aircraft to use India's airspace while flying to Sri Lanka for a visit. And the Indus commissioners of India and Pakistan recently met for the first time in over 2 years on 23rd March. It is important to note that these are small steps, and brokering long-lasting peace between any two countries is a long-term, drawn-out process. And there are several factors other than just talks which encapsulate the doctrine of peace. The recent engagements between the two old neighbours do raise the following questions though. Could the recent dialogue be a prelude to peace talks between the two countries? And what role do external powers, if any, play in prompting these talks? To discuss all this for today's episode, I spoke with Mr. Vivek Kaju, who is the former Secretary for West at the Ministry of External Affairs, and Smita Sharma, an independent journalist who writes on foreign policy and is a contributing editor at India Ahead. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you, and I'm your host, Himmat. Over the years, both India and Pakistan have made routine efforts to engage with each other to bring stability to the region. However, all of them largely failed. For any further dialogue to begin regarding de-escalation, both countries first would have to make peace with difficult decisions. On India's part, it will have to restore the spectrum of human rights in Jammu and Kashmir, and for Pakistan, it will have to abide by its existing commitments under the 2004 joint statement, which is to not permit any territory under Pakistan's control to be used to support terrorism in any manner. But if both countries are aware of what needs to be brought to the table to bring peace and stability to the region, what has prevented them from doing so all these years? Smita Sharma, an independent senior journalist who writes on foreign policy, weighs in on the past rapprochements between the two countries.
Of course, we've had a very, very checkered history. And I always describe the India-Pakistan relations as kabhi khushi, kabhi gham. It's just that the trajectory has always been so sharp, both be it going upwards or downwards. So it's a very unpredictable relationship. And for the most part of it, I think one of the basic attempts and basic challenges has been to try and normalize it in some ways. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Unlike India's relationships with other countries, where it's okay to have a diplomatic normal without too many highs or too many lows. So our history doesn't allow it to play out. So our own internal political developments in both countries also do not allow it to be so. So in the past, you've had attempts that have been made by the leadership in each countries. Not every peace attempt is something that actually has been nudged by a third party or by another foreign country. It has been, to a large extent, bilateral decisions. In fact, if you look at the history of Indian prime ministers, there's always been somehow that attempt towards the initial years, every time a prime minister has come in to try and seek a new path of peace and stability, because as has been famously said that you can change your friends, you cannot change your neighbors if you share boundaries with them. So you've had Prime Minister Vajpayee in the past. You've had that famous bus trip happen between the two countries when Nawaz Sharif was in Pakistan and Vajpayee in India. Of course, the role of America has been talked about by and large to a large extent, essentially when there has always been a very high risk conflict situation. That's the time when America, with all its interest, particularly in the Af-Pak region or the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, has always played a very prominent role in terms of at least dialing down tensions when the two nuclear neighbors have come very, very close to a warlike situation. So, be it, of course, after the parliamentary attack, be it the post Kargil situation, or recently, even after the Uri strikes, we do know at that point in time, NSA Ajit Doval was actually in close contact with his American counterpart as well. So the Americans have always essentially have had a role of dialing down tensions. So these countries have had an important role in some way or the other in trying to ensure that things do not go out of hand. And mostly India Pakistan initiatives have been driven by what has been happening on each other's borders. So in Pakistan, a lot of time the considerations has mostly been weighed in upon what is happening on the other border with Afghanistan. How much of American pressure is there? How much do they need to perform on the Afghan border? So, which is why the timing becomes very crucial, because once again, you have a time when the new Biden administration in the US is looking at pulling out its troops from Afghanistan through the negotiation process with the Taliban. It is very keen to ensure that there is no further escalated conflict. There is no appetite for war. There is no resource and money which the Biden administration would like to squander upon another new conflict at this point in time, at least. They're not like the neocons or the Republicans. That ways their policies are a little different. Of course, during the Obama term, we did see those wars happening in Libya. So there were wars that did happen during his term also, despite the Nobel Peace Prize being given for his promises. So the timing is something that becomes very, very important in a geostrategic context.
Given Pakistani General Bajwa's recent speech, which was full of buzzwords like connectivity, regional integration, human security, and trade and transit corridors, the country has a lot more at stake to make these engagements go smoothly, given its current political and economic environment. Here is Pakistan's current reality. The country's borrowings from the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and other nations have been well documented, with the nation's public debt, both domestic and external, being reported at a whopping 36.3 trillion rupees for the financial year of 2019 to 2020, which is an increase of 154% since 2013. And on the heels of dealing with a 12-year high inflation of 14.6% in January 2021, Pakistan's economy has also faced the daunting task of escaping the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our neighbour to the west has also always relied on external parties in third countries to initiate talks. A recent report by Bloomberg also pointed out that the recent engagements between India and Pakistan were actually brokered by the United Arab Emirates. And given US President Biden's recent announcement to bring stability in Afghanistan, Pakistan's other neighbour, extending the olive branch to India may change the US-Pakistan dynamic as well, given its current strategic nature. And all this prompts the following question: what role do external bodies have when it comes to brokering talks between two countries? And what is their influence? Vivek Kadju, the former Secretary of West at the Ministry of External Affairs, weighs in on how the back-channeling between countries function and what role may the UAE have in brokering peace between India and Pakistan.
In diplomacy, we are in the business of engagement, which means that the two sides begin a process of not showing their backs to each other, but exchanging views on any subject or talking quietly, etc. Sometimes these are talks called talks about talks. How will you resume talk? What will be the mechanics? Right. The second thing is the engagement process itself. And the engagement process can take various forms. So when we talk, when we say that the terror and talks can't go together, what we mean is that you cannot have this structured dialogue, which is a full engagement on cooperative mechanisms, on humanitarian issues, the resolution of outstanding issues, or even Jammu and Kashmir, unless terror ends. So engagement is one thing. After all, if there are missions and there are prisoners in each other's country, visas, etc., however difficult they may be,
as well, right?
But those humanitarian issues keep being addressed. They should not get interrupted. Otherwise, there will be great difficulties for peoples of the two countries. It is natural for India's neighbours, for the major powers, and for powers in the region, countries in the region like the UAE, for example, to want peace between India and Pakistan. No one wants two nuclear powers to be engaged in hostility. It creates uneasy ripples everywhere. So if the UAE, which hosts a very large expatriate Indian community and a very large expatriate Pakistani community, and which has had traditionally good ties with Pakistan and is increasingly having good cooperative relations with India, wants that there should be a reduction in tensions between the two countries, then that is not unnatural. In the case of the UAE, I think the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Zayed, has excellent relations, personal relations with Prime Minister Modi. And we know that Prime Minister Modi sets a lot of emphasis, or gives a lot of emphasis to personal relations in matters of diplomacy. So he has these relations, and I think the UAE leadership is also very well known to the Pakistani, both politicians as well as the Pakistan army. So I would not be surprised if they were urging both countries to try to find ways to reduce it. I would also not be surprised if for this purpose they were passing messages. However, I again distinguish between this kind of involvement and between what we call third-party mediation or third-party intervention. We've said plainly that India-Pakistan issues, and there's been a thing which goes back 50 years, 49 years. It goes back to the Simla Agreement. After the Simla Agreement of July 1972, India said that all outstanding issues between India and Pakistan will be decided through direct bilateral discussions or negotiations. There will be that India will not permit the involvement of third parties, any third party, in this process. So if a cooperative mechanism is to be set up, then India and Pakistan must meet directly and decide. Or if discussions have to take place on Jammu and Kashmir, then that too will be direct. There will be no third person in the room. So it's important to distinguish between, because I don't think that that any government of India, including the present government of India, can deviate from this fundamental principle of not permitting third-party intervention in substantive issues relating to India and Pakistan. But these exhortations for tensions, for reduction of tensions, etc., that's a different matter. So if the UAE is passing some messages, etc., well, that is the part of international diplomacy. Though generally we've not liked that too. I know that generally whenever such an attempt has been made, our answer has been that the Pakistani leadership knows where we are, and if they want to pick up the phone and talk to our leaders, or if their diplomats want to talk to our diplomats, they're welcome to talk. But sometimes between friends, if a friend says, "Can I pass a message that you want peace too?" You say, "Fine, pass a message." But nothing beyond that, I think.
It is also important to highlight how seriously Pakistan has put forward this idea of regional integration. Pakistan Army Chief Gen Bajwa chose a serious platform to extend the olive branch, the National Security Division's Islamabad Security Dialogue, and stating that Pakistan is ready for quote-unquote resumption of peace process or meaningful dialogue. However, he did place the onus of engagement on India, stating, and I quote, "Without the resolution of Kashmir dispute through peaceful means, the process of subcontinental rapprochement will always remain susceptible to derailment. Given the numerous ceasefire violations and big-ticket attacks such as Pulwama in 2016, what are the factors that would encourage the Modi government to pursue peace talks?" Mr. Kaju weighs in.
Two things here. The first is the Pakistan. I think the Pakistan army has an attitude which is deeply held that India is a permanent enemy. A very large number of the Pakistan people also believe, and the Pakistan army constantly reinforces this sentiment. Now, therefore, the recent statements made by General Bajwa, "Let us bury the past, we want good relations with everyone, have to be looked upon with great wariness. But at the same time, they have to be explored. It is a demand of international diplomacy, and that every opportunity for peace should be explored. That doesn't mean that you give up your wariness, or you start believing all that another man says, especially another country says or an institution says, which has such a record of enmity towards you. But it does mean exploring. I think we are at that stage at the moment to see in more concrete terms if the Pakistanis, and especially the army, will give up the use of terror against India. I, for one, find it difficult to believe that they'll morph in such a way as far as their strategic doctrine is concerned. But certainly, as I've been a professional diplomat, instinctively, I feel that one needs to explore if there's an opportunity. Now, I think as far as Indian prime ministers are concerned, if you see the history right from the beginning of independent India, then you will see that except perhaps for Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, everyone had this great desire for peace with Pakistan. And it makes sense to have peace with a large neighbor. And everyone pursued this desire in some manner or form. Mr. Modi did the same thing when he was assumed office in May of 2014. If you see from May of 2014, and I would go certainly July of 2016, for 2 years, despite the embarrassment of the Pathankot terrorist attack, he pursued a desire for peace. It is only when it became clear that the Pakistanis were continuing to pursue their hostility towards us and use terror, that he abandoned this path. And then came the responses by way of the surgical strikes and then the Balakot areas. But the first phase, he pursued peace. So today, I think it could well be that Mr. Modi has decided to explore whether it will be possible to pursue peace with Pakistan once again. And I think the onus of this will have to be on the Pakistanis. They will have to create the conditions which will enable the pursuit of peace by abandoning terror. The other requirement on the part of Pakistan will be to adopt a realistic attitude towards Jammu and Kashmir. If they don't abandon terror, if they don't adopt a realistic attitude towards J&K, then I don't see this process really going anywhere.
Continuing the conversation on why India would engage in peace talks with Pakistan, it is important to note that anti-Pakistan sentiment has been a perennial campaign topic for the BJP party and has also helped PM Modi come to power. Given that India is just days away from several key states heading to polls, does PM Modi have the diplomatic space to engage with Pakistan? Smita Sharma believes that given the single-party rule that India is currently in and the immense popularity which PM Modi holds, the political risk may be negligible.
Look, there are 2-3 things here, Himmat. A, when you look at Mr. Modi's popularity at the moment, it still remains pretty much solid across the country. Despite, of course, some states that the BJP have lost, despite the kind of massive pain that has been unleashed upon people 4 years back, whether it was through demonetization or last year we saw with the imposition of the sudden nationwide lockdown and the exodus of millions of migrant laborers and daily wagers. Despite all of that, he does seem to enjoy a very solid popularity in the country. So whether he has diplomatic space or not, I would say yes, because after a very, very long time, India is seeing a period where a single party rule has been continuing. It's not like a Manmohan Singh government, which had little elbow room, left alone within its own coalition, but also within its own Congress party. So the party itself, developed cold feet after the initial years during which we saw a lot of relative peace happening when Musharraf had donned the civilian uniform after having been the army chief. And then, of course, he was the president. And in those years, we also saw that relative zone of peace in a way, or some amount of peaceful developments and the composite dialogue process moving forward between India and Pakistan, particularly between the two Kashmirs. A lot was happening. So things were relatively peaceful. Musharraf also was under heavy pressure by the Americans at that point in time to ensure that there was little infiltration happening across the line of control. From there to now, and if you look at the second term of Manmohan Singh, when of course he hardly had room with all the coalition pulls and tugs that he was going through. Compare it to that. Mr. Modi, of course, is somebody whose party enjoys brute majority in parliament right now, in both the houses. It's been very easy for them to bulldoze legislations, be it, of course, it was the Article 370, be it CAA, or even recently, when it came to the farmers' bills that was legislated amid a pandemic. So in terms of numbers, it's not like Mr. Modi has something to really worry about, that if he were to make gestures to Pakistan, his numbers were going to fall. Also, in the current election states that you spoke about, if you look at the political narrative and the sloganeering so far, Pakistan hasn't really propped up in a way that it would have done perhaps if this was an Uttar Pradesh that was facing the elections. So, the Pakistan context, of course, has been used aggressively by the BJP in the past few years for domestic political rhetoric too, especially in the backdrop of the Uri strikes, and then what we saw play out during the Pulwama attack and the Balakot strikes as well. So, which is why it's very interesting that this sudden ceasefire announcement between the two countries, not the ceasefire announcement, but rather an announcement to adhere to and uphold the ceasefire, which was originally signed way back in 2003. So almost nearly 2 decades after, you have a sudden announcement marking this commitment that too came just days before the second anniversary of the Pulwama, the Balakot airstrikes as well. At a time when the Indian leadership has actually gone hammer and tongs in terms of its position on Pakistan. So there were a lot of unanswered questions that still remain. But it also came, we have to remember, even as we see a slow disengagement process that is still happening across the line of actual control with the Chinese PLA. So after that tense standoff, after that Galwan violence, where we had Indian casualties confirmed on our side, and of course, numbers that we don't know yet on the Chinese side, after these months of tension, suddenly when you were actually looking at a situation where experts were all speculating about a two-front possible war, even the army chief, General Narwane, recently had actually spoken about a two-front situation. So, and he had spoken about the collusive nature of the relationship between Pakistan and China. From there, you suddenly have this commitment being announced towards the ceasefire, which is very good, but with, like all things India-Pakistan, and as somebody who has been labeled as a jholawala because I was all for Georgia against war, I would still take it with a pinch of salt.
While India could certainly agree to start conversations with Pakistan on Jammu and Kashmir, which is the point of contention for both sides, compromising on its sovereignty in that region may not play well with the Indian public, especially with BJP's stoic supporters on the abrogation of the former state. Public opinion to a large extent has been the driving narrative on Pakistan and India, and has also largely constrained peace talks between the two countries, with anti-Indian sentiments in Pakistan and vice versa. But in light of the recent clashes with China on the eastern Ladakh border, the subsequent peace talks, and the reality of every country facing a global pandemic together, should India reconsider its stance? Smita Sharma weighs in.
Look, it's definitely a factor in my personal opinion. While our army, I know, has made vast improvements in its structural capabilities, in its institutional strength, and it's not like India will be incapable of if it were to be faced with an unfortunate challenge of a two-front situation. This is not the India in the 60s. India has developed, even in across the line of actual control. I mean, at the end of the day, India has been one of the few countries in the region that has been able to stand up to Chinese bullying, because we have seen China actually impinge on sovereign territory in, be it in the maritime domain or inland with its smaller Southeast Asian nations. So that at least has been a place where the world is looking for India to be that bulwark in a way to some sort of a standing up to the Chinese containment, and the fact that India shares a border, unlike a lot of the other Western counterparts that are looking China from afar, it obviously changes equations. So that may have been a factor that it's always better if you can de-escalate, and which is why, like I said right in the beginning, that all this talk of back channel dialogue is happening at a time, and we are watching that disengagement process across the Galwan Valley, across Pangong So, across the line of actual control. So that is a consideration for sure. Now, it's an interesting question you ask in terms of the public opinion, whether it's public opinion that forces and reduces the space for public diplomacy with Pakistan, or is it vice versa? Look, I think to a large extent, the public opinion has been molded by 2-3 things. The Mumbai attacks of 2008 definitely did one of the biggest harms to the relationship in recent history. And that scarred a lot of the younger generation, because between 2004 to 2007, whatever peace dividends were being reaped that I spoke about, especially in terms of the Kashmir context and a peaceful LOC, that all went down the drain. It went downhill. And that is when we even saw the doves within the Congress party actually start to sound like hawks. Then you had a series of terror attacks that have not stopped. You've seen the Pakistan-China nexus at the United Nations Security Council, where the Chinese veto has been used again and again in a way to make sure that, terrorists who should be, of course, on the blacklist, who should be banned, or who should be handed back to India, that it doesn't happen so. Also for its all-weather friend, Pakistan. Then there is that sensitive issue of the China-Pak economic corridor passing through the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which India calls, of course, an impingement of its sovereign territory. These are all issues that have worked its way in terms of molding Indian opinion. But what has also worked is the fact that this Indian public was also willing to give a chance when Mr. Modi, during his swearing-in ceremony, suddenly decided to call in all the heads of states and governments of the SAARC nations, including Nawaz Sharif, who came in. So Nawaz Sharif also took a risk when he came to attend that swearing-in ceremony, because it wasn't a step that was really sort of welcomed by the establishment back home. He challenged the establishment. Similarly, when Mr. Modi decided to suddenly fly down to Lahore on his way from Kabul and wish Mr. Nawaz Sharif. So for a leader like Mr. Modi, who does enjoy a wide popular support, he can always wield public opinion if he wants to, if he chooses to. But what we have also seen on the other side is that the hardening of public stance has happened because day in and day out, when you have your top leadership going in there and talking about Pakistan as a perpetual enemy or as, the big enemy state, there are, of course, legitimate justified concerns that we have. India, it's an important concern when we say that dialogue can happen only when you stop terrorism. But Pakistan is such a complicated mess, a conundrum that has been explained by the likes of a Hussein Haqqani so well over the years. And then when you look at that situation today, in 2013, I remember when I was covering elections in Pakistan, the ground mood was so different. Imran Khan lost those elections. Nawaz Sharif won the election. It was one of the rare elections in Pakistan where the political parties actually were not speaking about Kashmir, were not harping about anti-India sentiments. It was all being fought on domestic political currents. So it was an important move. But there also we have seen now that how things hardened up post-Pulwama, during Balakot, whatever has happened, a lot of the elite liberal space that was willing to talk to India, to engage, that space has shrunk in both the countries. And in our country in particular, it is also definitely impacted by the religious nationalism, the politics of Hindutva that is playing out. But I do believe that for somebody like Mr. Modi, if he chooses tomorrow to again take another step, his followers will fall in line and let him, experiment with what he wants to do. So it will be a lot dependent on his own political willingness also at this point as to how much space does he want to really give and breathing room does he want to give to this bilateral relationship.
As I stated earlier, it would be an exaggeration to say that a new process of peace has begun between India and Pakistan, given the limited engagement both countries have had in the past few days. However, these small steps have opened a short window of opportunity where public consensus on global peace, political stability, and economic priorities are aligned. And it is up to both governments coming to terms, which is skeptical given the shared history of conflict, to further widen that window. If you liked listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.